respiration, right? So I put on Canvas over the weekend this little 3 PowerPoint slide that kind of reiterated what we did last Wednesday in class, right? Remember my big whiteboard drawing of the capillary with the CO2 in it? And we talked about how hydrogen ions in your blood will not actually enter the cerebrospinal fluid. And that's how your central chemoreceptor works, because it's in the medulla, otherwise known as a hydrogen ion sensor. So that's what this whole idea is about. This comes from a book by Silverthorne. If you ever get a chance to have a Silverthorne physiology book, she's really good. She explains things in a really nice fashion. But that's the idea, right? See how the hydrogens can't come in. There's your cerebrospinal fluid, so it's actually those hydrogens that go to the central chemoreceptor, aka hydrogen ion sensor. And the more hydrogens that go here, the more action potentials that we send, and therefore the faster we breathe, right? This is the normal function of it. I want you to realize that the central chemoreceptor is your primary driver for respiration rates. You are all using it right now. That's what controls your respiration rates. So are you just busted now, or what? There we go. So what happens when the central chemoreceptor doesn't work very well? Remember we talked about things called hypercapnia, which you are going to define as a chronic elevated level of CO2. And that lowered the pH of your cerebrospinal fluid. And with that lowering of your cerebrospinal fluid's pH, the ependymal cells created by carbon ions to attach to that hydrogen to raise the pH back up. But the problem is when you do that, right, we are now capturing the hydrogen that would normally go to the hydrogen ion sensor. And so I don't have as many signals going to my hydrogen ion sensor. Well, we have a couple of study guide questions to talk about chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, COPD, or otherwise more specifically called emphysema, which I'm going to put right here. So this is my fantastic artwork for a normal, healthy alveolar duct. Now these are alveolar sacs. And here comes your pulmonary capillary coming along through here. Supposed to be normal. What is the PO2 in the lungs? Okay. What is the normal arterial PO2 having just left the lungs? PO2 of 100, right? You guys really want to work those out, because I promise you somewhere you'll find those being relatively healthy. Now, if we look at an emphysema lung, it might look something like this. All right? Let's focus on this part right here. All right? If I were to trace the length of my black line, the entire length, right? This is surface area, right? That is the surface that my gas exchange happens with. That's surface area. Do I have less surface area here? Yes. Much less, right? Less surface area means what? Less opportunity for diffusion across the membranes. When you look at the capillaries of someone with emphysema, oops, no, yeah. Part of chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. Their PO2 values equal roughly 50 compared to yours of 100. That's a consequence of that lower surface area. There's less opportunity for gas exchange. That's what I want to keep in mind to make this have sense, is that when blood is coming by your alveoli, remember it's in the capillary. Blood is single file in the capillary. So as blood moves by the surface area, right, I'm picking up oxygen, I'm donating my CO2. By the time I leave, I have a PO2 of roughly 100. But if you have less surface area, as the blood moves by, there's less opportunity to pick up that oxygen. Now, if there's less opportunity to pick up oxygen, what's going to happen, do you think, to your opportunity to give off CO2? It's going to be less as well, as Michelle very quietly says that, right? So your PCO2 is going to be higher. PCO2 should be roughly 50 as well. Now let's go back to the other type of a chemoreceptor, known as what? What's the other? Besides the central chemoreceptor, you have a... Peripheral. And what do peripherals respond to? Give you 0 points on that answer.
Severe.
Hydrogen.
Severe O2 levels, I'll give you 0 on that one too.
Severe drops in CO2.
O2 below 60.
Say that again.
60 or below.
A PO2 of 60 or less, right? I said significant drops in PO2. Significant as a PO2 being at 60 or less. Look at my emphysema patient. Do they have a PO2 of 60 or less? All right, so they should be getting a corresponding increase, right, in ventilation rates. And what I'm trying to do is have you guys tie in this idea right here. Your favorite topic of frickin' graphs. Right there, right? This shows us that at PO2 of 60 or less, I start breathing faster. So they should be breathing faster. They're not. Right? You would expect them to have higher respiration rates. Right? Now the problem is, with that increase in PCO2, let's go back to this. I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth. With an increase in PCO2, they're going to get more CO2 to dissolve in their cerebrospinal fluid. The more CO2 they have, the more hydrogens they're going to create. What's going to happen to their pH? It's going to go down, right? So this is what makes them hypercapnia. Because they have an inability to exchange gases, their O2 levels diminish because of poor diffusion abilities. Their CO2 increases because of poor diffusion abilities. They become chronically elevated levels of CO2, which lowers their pH. Now here's where the ependymal cells come in. They start creating that bicarbonate ion, which picks up those hydrogen ions. So their physiology says they should be breathing faster because of an increase in CO2. But we know that their central chemoreceptors aren't working because the stupid ependymal cells over here are making bicarbonate to bind to that hydrogen, so I don't have as many hydrogen ions going to the hydrogen ion sensor, as many as I should based upon my elevated level of CO2. So they're going to default to their auxiliary respiratory regulator. That's your peripheral chemoreceptor. That's your backup, your peripheral chemoreceptors. If this is for Emma, she is no longer dependent upon her central, because it's not working anymore, because she has chronically elevated levels of CO2. She defaults back, or at least her physiology does, to the peripheral chemoreceptors. That's what's controlling her breathing rates. Because she has significantly lower levels of O2, this should cause her to breathe faster. Anybody here work in a hospital and they put that thing on your fingertip? What's that thing on your fingertip? All right. At what number on that do nurses get a little panicky?
93.
Probably really 95 or lower, really, right? Everybody's a little bit different in terms of their tolerance, but it's measuring your saturation levels of blood for oxygen. So let's go to this. Before we switch to the next diagram, everybody okay with the idea of hypercapnia? Leading to an increase in bicarbonate ions, which actually leads to a decrease in functioning of your central chemoreceptor? Everybody's okay with that? All right, I'm going to say that means yes.
I have a question.
Well, speak up, Miss Katie.
I was formulating. I can't speak. Okay, so it switches to the peripheral chemoreceptors being most dominant because of the increase in CO2, fundamentally, or?
No, so we always have both of those working,
Right.
right? But for you and I, the peripherals only respond to what? A significant decrease in PO2. So right now, our centrals take that moderate fluctuation of hydrogen ions and cause us to breathe faster or breathe slower. Because hers are no longer working, only because they're not actually receiving all those hydrogen ions, because the bicarbonate from the ependymal cell is grabbing those hydrogens and turning them into carbonic acid, which also leads to more CO2. That causes you to lower your ventilation rates. If ventilation rates go down, let's try this. If ventilation rates go down, what happens to O2 levels in the lungs?
Do you agree with that?
If respiration rates go down, what happens to O2 levels in the alveoli?
Goes down.
It goes down, right? That's what the graph says, right? The graph is all about how ventilation, right, determines alveolar gases. Well, that's alveolar gases. If respiration slows down, what happens to my O2 levels? Oh boy. If respiration rate slows down, everybody, what happens to the O2 levels indicated by my orange curve on that graph?
It decreases.
It decreases, right? Well, what's my O2 levels in my blood? It's decreased, right? Two reasons. One, you're breathing slower because you have fewer hydrogen ions going to the central chemoreceptor, but also because of the pathetically poor surface area in your lungs. That makes sense? All right, so that's why, right, I would notice your peripheral's working now because that O2 is enough to make me increase my respiration rates. And I notice that that's due to the peripheral chemoreceptors.
So in emphysema, the peripherals are always working then?
Yeah.
Okay.
The centrals are trying to work, but they're just
Just not.
being inhibited in a sense because they're
Right.
not getting their hydrogen ions.
Okay.
All right? So then, you go and visit somebody with low O2 values.
Is PO2 inside the alveoli affected? So
Well, it's going to be lower than a normal person, so that might be like, could be anywhere between 80 to 60. All right? It's definitely a lot lower than this. Okay? Then we have this idea. We want this. We talked about this, right? This is how your peripheral works. Remember, it responds to significantly lower levels of O2. O2 goes into the peripheral chemoreceptor, attaching to chemical gated potassium channels. And the more O2 you have, the more potassium channels open. I'm sorry, the more that they close, pardon me. No, the more they open, yeah. The more they open, the more negative the membrane becomes. So the more O2, the more they open, the more potassium leaves, and my brain thinks I'm breathing just fine. But low O2 causes the gates to close. Because the gates close, potassium can't leave, making the cell membrane depolarize, which opens up voltage-gated calcium channels, which causes calcium to come in, to bind to vesicles, to release their neurotransmitters, and you breathe faster, right? And that's due to what? Low O2. You come by and give somebody an oxygen mask. You give them maybe 4 or 5 liters of O2 a minute. You add O2, then what's going to happen according to this diagram? If you give them O2, right, O2 attaches, they are going to open or they're going to close. Well, I heard close, I heard open. So what's the whole point? Here's how you can work your way backwards. I know that if I give somebody who's working with their peripheral chemoreceptors, if I give them O2, that would cause them to breathe slower. I just memorized that fact. Now here's why that's true. In order to make somebody breathe slower, I need to have fewer neurotransmitters released. All right? Why would I have fewer neurotransmitters released? Probably because there's less calcium coming into the cell. Why is there less calcium coming in? Probably because I have fewer voltage-gated calcium channels open. What makes them open up? A more negative membrane. So if the membrane becomes more positive, that would close these channels up. Why is it becoming more positive? the calcium is staying inside the cell. Why is it staying inside? Because the channels are going to be closed. So how did I get myself all screwed up? Wait a minute here.
You're gonna have more potassium inside.
All right.
They're gonna open, right?
The cell's more negative
O2
on the
makes
inside
them
because
open.
they leave.
Well, no, the more O2 you give them, the more they open. The more they open, the more negative you become. I was upside down,
All right, which
right,
causes
literally,
the
all
calcium.
right? This opens because you become more negative. No, but I'm sorry, you become less negative. Jesus Christ.
Positive.
God almighty, all right. This is why it's easy to get screwed up sometimes. Membranes have to become more positive to open up a voltage-gated channel. The membrane must become more positive. It becomes more positive because more potassium stays inside. More potassium stays inside because the channels are open. Why am I doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're closing. I'm sorry, folks. Holy crap, there's a major short circuit in my brain tonight. All right, more potassium stays inside because the channels are closed. When potassium leaves, the membrane becomes more negative. When it becomes more negative, these guys close. All right, so let's do that all over again.
Would it?
Good and what?
So, but if you have low O2, then the potassium channels close.
Right, which is what you want.
So if you have high PO2, then
The
the
channels
potassium
open.
channels are going to open, which is going to close the calcium channel.
Right. All right, so let's just take a 20-second WTF moment here. Michael?
What signals the neuron?
Well, the neurotransmitter signals the neuron.
I know there's low oxygen, right? So the glomal cell senses it because what precipitates communication to the action potential for the neuron, low pressure of oxygen.
Yes, Bill, just hang on a second, all right? Let's start this from the beginning and not get you guys all screwed up. Peripheral chemoreceptors work in response to a low PO2. When you have low O2, that means there's less oxygen attaching to a chemical gated potassium channel. So O2 is my key to make that channel open up. When I have less O2, channels close. If channels close, potassium stays inside. Membranes become more positive. That causes voltage-gated calcium channels to open. That's a more positive membrane. That means more calcium comes in, binds to vesicles, more neurotransmitters are released. I breathe faster because of the lower O2. And the lower the O2, the more channels that are closed, the more that these guys are open, the more neurotransmitters are released, and the faster you breathe. Now you come by and you give this person oxygen because you think that they are having a low PO2 value. So you give them oxygen. That's going to cause them to breathe slower because the more O2 you give them, right, the more those guys open up. The more potassium leaves, the more negative the membrane becomes. And the more negative it becomes, the more of those channels close. They don't open. So there's less calcium coming in, there's less neurotransmitters released, respiration rate's lower. So the more O2 you give, the slower they breathe. So if you have someone who is, right, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder or who is labeled as emphysema, and you know nothing about them, the basic idea is give them no more than about 1.5 liters a minute of oxygen. That's the safe number until you have an actual respiratory therapist come by and say they can afford to be given a little more. Because this is a crutch we tried to mention last Wednesday. You know they need more oxygen. Great. But the more oxygen you give them, the slower the ventilation rates become. So you sort of come to a compromise of a little help on the O2 with a little problem of your breathing rates. And you just can't give them a lot of O2 because you will actually cause them to stop breathing. If you think about it, if I were to take Kyle over here, he's got emphysema. I feel really bad for Kyle. Let's say he's my stepbrother and he's worth $1 billion, right? Literally, let's say. And I want that money. I come by and I just jack his O2 up to about 9, 10 liters a minute. Oh, I need a cup of coffee. I'm gonna close the door behind him so nobody disturbs you. And we come back and he's coded. Well, what are they gonna find? Nothing. No needle marks, no elevated drug levels, right? It's an interesting way, but that's how people sometimes when they die don't realize the cause of death was because their family members at home with home care ended up accidentally killing them because they gave them too much oxygen.
Can you trace that at all? Like, if you were to increase oxygen? This is important
No,
information,
you
Tom.
can't. You can't. Because here's why you can't. Here's why you can't trace it. So
This is terrible.
I just died. Are my mitochondria still working? Yeah, they're still making the ATP. And what are they doing? They're taking the oxygen in my tissues and using that. So my O2 levels are lowering, 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 lowering. How are they going to know how high they were? They're not.
You need to turn the bottle back down.
Oh, sure, I'll come back. Yeah. Turn it back down to, let's say, 3/4 of a liter a minute.
Right.
Yeah. So I want them to use money. I don't love. I just want his money.
How long will that reaction take?
Huh? It might take a while. All right. So does that make sense? Right. Again, the idea is that peripheral chemoreceptors are your backup if you have emphysema, because the centrals aren't working. The centrals don't work because of the idea of the chronic bicarbonate ions coming from the ependable cells. So your natural physiology defaults to auxiliary, which is the peripherals. They only respond to a significant drop in O2. And the lower the O2, the more calcium comes into the channel to cause more neurotransmitters released. But if you do the opposite and give someone more O2, right, the more potassium leaves, the more negative the cell becomes. The more voltage-gated channels don't open, they actually close. That means less neurotransmitters are released and the person breathes slower. So you have to be careful of how much O2 you give them. Everybody okay with that? We got you all unscrewed. Sorry about that. All right, we're going
You
to
said it was about a liter a minute. Right?
about 1.5 liters a minute is the default. I don't know anything else about you. I'm just going to do no more than that.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to give you guys a 3-minute break. All right, to get legal drugs, suck on some oxygen,